Good afternoon, everyone. I am Cynthia Talbert, your host, and welcome to The Awakening. This afternoon, we have someone with us today who has a lot of titles. He has a lot of letters behind his name, but he says that that does not matter. He says what is important is that what comes out, what comes forth, your knowledge base is in alignment with the Word of God. And so we welcome Dr. Sharps this afternoon with that in mind to The Awakening. Dr. Sharps, welcome to The Awakening.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
And we're very happy to have you here. So Dr. Sharps, you are a man who has really lived a very interesting life. And God has brought you to this point to where you are currently very passionate about health. But you were not always of this mindset. You did not always feel this way. Could you please tell us how you reached the point to where you are now?
Yes, I'll be happy to. Well, in a nutshell, I tell everybody I was blessed with poor health. The reason why I say that is because if I didn't have all these health issues, I wouldn't be where I am today. But I basically grew up in New York City. I went through the normal thing. I had a pretty good extensive education. I have a bachelor's degree. I have an MBA, advanced business degree. But the first part of my career, for the first 24 years, I worked with IBM, in a whole host of areas. But early in my career, when I was in my 20s, I had a lot of the health issues that I had as I was growing up. They were starting to come to a head. As you can imagine, being in the Fortune 500 company and moving up that executive management chain is very stressful. Yeah. So a lot of the health issues that I had in my youth and a little bit in my college, they really started to manifest themselves in my mid-20s. And that's why I say I was kind of blessed with poor health, because I had skin issues. I had a whole host of digestive issues. I had a heart palpitation. In my 30s, I had a heart murmur.
Both in your 30s?
In my 30s, yeah. Both of my grandparents on my mother's side died in their mid-50s. So I had a condition towards cardiovascular disease. They both died of cardiovascular issues. One of a stroke, one of a heart attack. So I had those kind of predispositions in terms of my diet, my lifestyle. I was the oldest in my family, the first. And so my mom had me when she was like 16. She was young. So, I was the first one and might not have gotten the best nutrition, et cetera. But basically I had a lot of these health issues to the point where in my mid 30s, I started to pay some attention. And one of the doctors I went through was a doctor for my allergies. And I jokingly say, according to his test, I was allergic to 103 different things, including my first wife. So I was just the basket case. And so, and I realized, like I said, I had a very good education. I graduated #1 in elementary school. I went through college, advanced business. So I wasn't a dummy. I figured at this rate, at the 30s, I wasn't going to last too long. So I started paying more and more attention to health. And I in my mid 20s, it just so happened I even had my back went out, and I was out of work for 2 weeks. So I was a little bit scared. So I was the first introduction to alternative protocols. I met a chiropractor, and he was about my age. He was 26. I was 24. And we just hit it off. He knew nothing about taxes and everything. I had an income tax business on the side also, as well as working with IBM. So you can see I was really very, very active. And so we became friends. I did his income taxes, and he dragged me around to this whole new world of health. And so I learned about diet, lifestyle. I learned about food combining, which is the topic today. And I started to implement these things, and it made major changes in my health as I was going into my 30s, my 40s. So by the time most people, when they're in their mid 40s, men, we go through our midlife crisis, but instead of looking for, wine, women, and song, I wanted to change careers because I learned about this whole new area, and I was no longer interested in being an executive on the fast track, in a Fortune 500 company. And so, as you said, I have a lot of letters. I was scared. Here I am, 48 years old, changing careers. So I got 3 doctorates and a PhD in 2 years. It's supposed to take me about 5 years or so. I got my first doctorate I got in 9 months. And I just learned, if you look behind you, I have a lot of wallpaper. I literally can plaster my wall with all the certificates and all the degrees that I have. But basically, that's what I did. I made that transition. And around that time, as you so noted, not only did I make the transition from a job standpoint, but also from a spiritual standpoint. In addition to studying all of the major health systems out there, and Ayurvedic, homeopathy, all of them, I studied all the major philosophies also. And I was kind of searching. I was actually raised a Catholic. I was in the seminary for 2 years. I left at the age of 18, and one had nothing to do with Christianity. So I studied all the other religions, studied Islam, Buddhism, etc. I met I was about to become a Taoist. I met this head Taoist from Thailand. And long story short, basically, so at that same time, I made a transition not only in my job, but in my spiritual life. And it worked out very well, because then I knew that I wasn't in charge. I realized who was in charge. I committed my education, my transition, and everything to him. I got baptized around that same time that I left IBM, and the rest is history. So I've been doing this now for going on 30 years now. So this is my second career, which is longer than my 24-year career at IBM that I had at IBM. So that in a nutshell is the transition. And as I indicated, this food combining was a major step in improving my digestive efficiency and my health, as well as, implementing all the other laws of health. And so that's basically how I got started. And eventually I made the transition. I became a practitioner. I started giving lectures. And as you may know now, I'm the president and CEO of the International Institute of Original Medicine, where we teach this to people all over the world, where they can get certificates and as a certified nutritionist, certified herbalist, certified medical missionary, and a bachelor's, master's, doctorate. And we just got, and all of these programs, it's the only biblically based accredited school in the world that goes all the way from the certificate, and we just got accredited for our PhD program last year. So we have the most comprehensive, the most completed school, and it is biblically based, and God has blessed even before I acknowledge his blessing. But ever since I made the transition, it's just been blessing upon blessing. I can continue to learn more and more about his original medicine, and that's what I am a proponent of. And so I hope that wasn't too long, but that in a nutshell is my background. And of course, the food combining is one of my favorite. Well, let me say it this way. That is the one that's in the most demand. And that's the one that most people are interested in. But it's one of my top 10, up there among the germ theory and the 10 leading factors underlying all diseases. So it's one of my top ones also. So I love talking about it. And so it's an honor and a privilege for me to run my mouth talking about one of my favorite topics.
Well, I can tell you, I'm very happy, because that's what we're here to talk about today, proper food combinations. Now, this is the thing. Some people are aware, they're already convicted that, okay, I understand that I need to eat certain foods to be healthy. But let's say I'm already doing that. I'm eating certain foods. I'm already a vegetarian or whatever. So you're telling us today that that's not the only thing we need to be concerned about or aware of, but also not just to eat nuts and grains, fruits, the healthful things, but we need to, it's the combinations. You're telling us what we eat at the meals is just as, or almost as, or more important as what we eat, not the combinations, not what we eat, but also everything that we put together. We need to be knowledgeable about what we're putting at each meal and not just eat anything we want at every meal. You're telling us there's a science behind this. There's something that we need to know.
That's very correct, Cynthia. It's about the physiology of digestion. Now, I don't have to talk about the no-no foods. There's certain foods we shouldn't be eating, but there's the category of things that I talk about. A lot of well-meaning people, they're doing good things wrongly. And so they're eating a lot of good foods, but they're eating it in the wrong manner. And that's where the proper food combining comes in. And proper food combining has to do with the physiology of digestion, you know, the science of how the enzymes work in terms of timing and the amount in the foods that we eat. And so fundamentally, what a lot of people don't realize is that the digestive system is designed to be most efficient in what is called a monotrophic diet. Mono meaning one, trophic meaning type. And if you look at the animal kingdom, you don't see them eating a lot of variety in their meals. Now, they don't need to, but take the horse, for example. He eats either grains or he eats grass, but he doesn't eat it at the same meal. And the same for human beings. It's about combining things in the most efficient manner for digestive efficiency.
Okay. And so monotrophic, you're talking about animals. Explain to us when you talk about the animals, what do they eat? When you're talking about they don't eat more than one thing at a meal.
Yeah, well, you look at any of the animals. You look at baboons, you look at apes. They might eat bananas, they eat acorns, they eat you know, their diet is not as rich, there's not as much variety, and it doesn't need to be because we're much on a higher level. We need the variety, but not all at one meal. And so we can learn from the animals. One of my favorite authors outside the Bible says, you know, dumb animals do smarter things than human beings at times. And so in my particular case, I was dumber than the animals. I was eating all these combinations because when I first learned about health, I thought I needed all this nutrition. We learned that we need to have carbohydrates, fats, proteins, vitamins, minerals, all these different things. And so I was trying to do that. I used to think pizza was a health food. It had the grain, it had the cheese, it had and back in the day, it had the meat on there, it had the sauce. So it had carbohydrates, fat, protein. And I was wondering why I had the skin problems. I had indigestion, I had gas, I had burping, all kinds. It even to the point where the stomach issues even migrated to migraine headaches because of the digestive inefficiency. And both for myself and my clients, I got such immediate relief. I have some clients that have been on medication, have indigestion literally for over 10 years, and their problem resolved in less than 3 weeks. That's how powerful food combining is. And when you stop to think of it, there's 3 types of macronutrients, right? Carbohydrates, fat, protein. They're different enzymes and they're different stages where they're broken down in the system. Carbohydrate digestion begins in the mouth, right? And that's where the amylases are to start the breakdown of those carbohydrates. Protein breakdown doesn't really start to begin until it's in the stomach, right? And so, and when you have protein, it stimulates the stomach to secrete hydrochloric acid, which then takes an enzyme called pepsinogen and breaks it down to the pepsin to digest the protein. And then the fat digestion doesn't really begin until the small intestines. So you can start seeing if you have all these competing things going on at the same time in the stomach, you're diluting those enzymes for any one of those particular foods.
So you're
Does that make sense?
And then and just in case you've noticed, my phone went from 11% to 2%. But anyway, so I had to try to plug it up. I didn't think it was going to go down that fast. But in either event, so you're telling us that we should not eat a lot of different foods at one meal. We should focus on 1, 2, 3, maybe at one meal. Is that what you're stating? We shouldn't have that smorgasbord, the all-you-can-eat bar.
Well, yes and no. you can have multiple foods that are in the same category. So you can
Oh.
have 5, 6, 7 different pieces of fruit, 7, 8 different vegetables, but they're all in the same category. What you don't want to do is start crossing boundaries. So fruits and vegetables, there are problems when you start combining those, and you start to think about it. You try to eat an orange with a potato, it doesn't even sound right. Yeah, so you're making a face, so is your stomach making a face. And see, so some of it is kind of obvious, intuitively obvious, but from a biochemical standpoint, from a digestive standpoint, it even what happens is when you do pour food combining and you dilute those juices, you don't get the complete breakdown of the carbohydrates or the proteins. And in that particular case, the carbohydrates ferment. And so we become human distilleries. As a matter of fact, I know some vegetarians that have livers as bad as alcoholics. They're creating so much excess alcohol through poor food combining. And then if you have, and then the proteins that stay in the stomach too long and don't digest, they putrefy. And you can see that provides an environment for the proliferation of parasites and a host of other issues. So you can start to see where this food combining, what you want to do is have this no more than 3 or 4 different foods at a time, but they want to have them be as compatible as possible in terms of types. So fruits is a separate category, vegetables is a separate category, the grains, as you noted, is a category, the proteins, the meat. So there are different categories. And so there's these 7 to 8 rules of food combining. You know, don't combine carbohydrates with proteins, you know, those kinds of things, fruits and vegetables. So those 7 rules, it's not 107. So it's pretty easy to understand and grasp. That's why it's so empowering for a lot of my clients, because and you start to go through it, it makes sense, but nobody talks about it. You don't see that in any of the nutrition books. I didn't even learn it in when in my first doctorate, my doctor of naturopathy, in the nutrition section, they didn't even talk about food combining. They just talked about wholesome foods, making sure you're getting your vitamins and minerals and your carbohydrates, fat and protein, and waxed eloquently on the importance of all of these, what it does in terms of building hair and nails and skin. But nobody was really talking about food combining. So it was a blessing when I found this particular topic. You know, which I didn't, it's not my discovery. It was a doctor by the name of Dr. Shelton. As a matter of fact, my presentation is called Food Combining Made Easy. It's his book that I basically based it off of. And that goes back to, it's not like 5 or 10 years ago, goes back to the middle of the last century, 1950s.
You know, it's interesting because I used to have horses, and you are correct. I mean, generally you give them their hay or you give them their oats.
Right.
And I think of other animals. I mean, are there any animals that we feed them a buffet and all you can eat buffet and put it in front of them?
Nope.
So you're right. We
the
can
only
actually
one is
learn from the animals and learn from nature. And this is something I had never thought about. And then you mentioned, I know we're going to discuss it later, but since you brought it up, the human distillery, that certain things actually cause alcohol to build up in your system. And you have vegetarians who are actually eating these things, and it could damage your liver as if they were drinking regular alcohol.
right.
Now, what causes this with specifically human distillery?
As I said, the digestion, it requires certain enzymes. You dilute those enzymes when you have all these things combining at the same time in the stomach. So you need the acid to break down the protein. You need the amylases, which is an alkaline type thing. So you got the alkaline and acid. And what happens when you mix an alkaline and an acid solution? They neutralize each other. So that solution isn't strong enough to break down either the carbohydrates sufficiently or the protein sufficiently, because you've weakened the digestive juices. Now, that's if you have weak digestion. Now, some people, they're blessed. And just like some people have these very high IQs, they have like an IQ of 160, 170, and they never have to open up a book. and they get 90s and 100s, and you want to punch them in the mouth because you're working like a dog to get your 70 and to get out of the class. So there's some people that have very high digestive quotients, if you will, DQs, let's call it, or MQs, metabolic quotients. But that's not most of us. And most of us, it's an acquired problem. We're not born with the problem, but starting from infancy, you know, if you're not having breast milk, which, you know, especially in the United States, there's not a high emphasis on breast milk. You know, as soon as you get out of the hospital, they give you a little 6-pack of Similac or some other fake thing. So you never really completely build up any of your system, your brains, your nervous system, including the digestive system, effectively enough. And a lot of people don't realize, just like it takes years to develop the central nervous system. Some people say up until the age of 30. That's why you're not even responsible up until the age of 18 to 21 for a lot of the things that you're involved with. So the same thing with the digestive system. And some people, it's like, for example, the digestive system doesn't really mature enough to eat meat until the age of 12. And so if you're eating meat early, you're already taxing it and compromise. These are things that I learned. And for even nuts and seeds are good for you. But the digestive system, this is good. This is a God-made food. This isn't a processed food. But the digestive system isn't mature enough until the age of 8. So that's why I said a lot of people doing good things wrongly. So with a little bit of understanding in terms of how the digestive physiology works and the timing and what are called the circadian cycles, you know, the different cycles that your body goes through and your digestive systems in terms of what's the most efficient timing for the elimination process and the digestion process and the assimilation process. And so the rule, mentioning that the rule for digestion was something that you kind of indicated earlier, Cynthia, is not what you eat, it's what you assimilate.
Interesting. Because it has to go through the body. It has to be processed properly.
Otherwise, and anything that you eat that you don't eliminate or assimilate becomes a poison.
Wow. And I think that there are a lot of poisons in our bodies these days, and that's why we have the level of sickness. I've been in churches and I've heard people, the pastors say, how many of you need prayer because of a medical condition? And almost every hand went up. And I've seen this happen more than once. And I'm talking about within a church, not people outside the church, but within a church. So you mentioned that there are at least seven rules concerning food combination. Correct. The first one you have is fruits should be eaten alone. Right. Please expound on this principle. And you mentioned that the body is always working towards survival. Correct. And I definitely want you to put in that you said that fruit digests quickly and that a Twinkie, that the thing that you talk about, the Twinkie, I want you to tell us about that.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for asking that question. Well, fruit is the most efficient food that you can eat. That's the food that, remember, started in the Garden of Eden. It's so efficient that fruit has all the enzymes in it to digest itself. So if you take a piece of fruit and leave it out and you come back a year later, it will be completely gone. It would eat itself up because all the enzymes are in there. So it even can self-digest itself, and vegetables to the certain extent also. Now the Twinkie, you put that in the trunk and you leave it there for 5 or 10 years, and it'll be in the same condition as the time when you left it in there. It doesn't break down at all. There's no enzymes in it, and there's not much enzymes in your body. It's a processed food. So your body looks at it and says, okay, well, now what enzyme am I supposed to throw at this? I know what to throw at fruit and vegetables and all the things that God gave us, but these processed foods, you're challenging your gastrointestinal system to figure out what to throw at it, to break it down. Wow. And so fruit is the most efficient food. It's the most complete food. You can live on 100% fruit diet. But if you look at a lot of the animals, they're 100% fruitarians. You look at some of these gorillas out there and apes, that's all they eat is fruit. And they're way stronger than any human being. What happens is, and the point that you made so eloquently, Cynthia, was that the body is always working towards survival. So when you put all these different combinations in your body, it works out on the most difficult thing to digest first. So think of having a steak and then an apple. Which one is the more difficult to digest? It's the steak. So your body goes into emergency mode, trying to break down that steak. So that fruit is sitting around, sticking around, waiting for its turn. And in the meantime, it's in this warm environment, it's breaking down, but it's fermenting because you're not really devoting the time to break it down sufficiently while that meat is trying to be broken down. And so one of the things that I used to do, which was a major problem, is and back in the day when I ate meat and I even ate pork, I'd have my pork chop sandwich on white bread, and I thought I was doing myself a favor by having a melon afterwards. I got my fruit, and I would be so doubled up in pain, and so melons, the saying in the food combining world is melons, they should be eaten alone or leave them alone. It's such an efficient food. It doesn't even combine well with other fruit. It's such an efficient food. It's over 90% water. Does that,
it's
make sense?
Interesting you should say that, because I noticed that about the watermelon, that, you would eat, and then it's like you eat the watermelon and it's like you get gas, but I never knew what was happening. And then in time, I just started eating the watermelon at a meal separately. But one thing that you bring out about fruits is that you should eat, I'm thinking it's you, but seeds, that you should eat seeds, because you don't want to eat too many, or nuts, because you don't want to eat, have too much sugar going in and end up becoming, I guess, maybe a diabetic or whatever. So you said seeds. So with the watermelon, I just found out recently that it's okay to eat the seeds.
Yeah, it's preferable. It's preferable to eat the seeds. Think about it. Where's all the nutrients? Where did that watermelon come from? It came from the seed. So there's a lot of very powerful nutrients that not only helps the growth of the watermelon, but guess what? It helps the growth of various organs and systems in the human body. See, God knew what he was doing. He didn't give us an Encyclopedia Britannica when he gave us the Bible and Genesis 1:29 and 30, where he told us what were the best food for us, but he knew these things. And what we're in the process of doing is learning these things. But you know what? Our learning is accelerated when we obey, rather than trying to find all kinds of ways to bypass what God has given us. So back to your point, the challenge I have is trying to find seeded watermelons. Everybody wants to eat seedless, and the good news is it's impossible to have a seedless watermelon. It's impossible to have any kind of seedless fruit. Even the seedless grapes, they're not as prominent, but what they do is so microscopic. It's not, you don't see it, but you can't completely get rid of it. You can try to bypass God, but in the final analysis, he can't be done away with. His
so
plan.
You can eat the seeds in grapes?
Say that again?
You can eat the seeds in grapes?
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite fasting is the grape fast, where you eat the nothing but grapes for anywhere from 1 to 10 days, and you eat it with the seeds. And there are special nutrients in now you don't swallow them whole, you chew it. See, that's the other thing. That's the other food combining principle. There's no teeth in the stomach. And you need to chew it thoroughly, because that digestion, especially for fruit and that, it starts in the mouth, right? And so when you eat those seeds and you chew it thoroughly, you are releasing, a powerhouse of nutrients in the seed that was not only responsible for building that fruit, in this case the grape, but the body. See, everybody's focused on carbohydrates, fat, and protein. What we've learned is that the most important thing is minerals. And the minerals for making that fruit and for supporting the functional integrity of the body is in that seed. So Even when you grow it, you can't grow watermelon, you can't grow grapes on sand, can you? It has to
No.
be mineral rich soil.
Yes.
And what I explained to people is that's what God gave. Just like a Ford plant that builds cars, there's all these different parts, right? That they assemble to make a high functioning a high functioning automobile. What God did is he also gave us a plant. Just like Ford, they have a Ford plant. God has a body plant. It's called fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and grains. And that's the manufacturing facility for taking all of those nutrients that are in the ground, all those minerals, and organizing them for bio functionality and integrity, which is a whole different way of looking at food.
Okay. So now rule 2.
Yes, ma'am.
Starch and proteins combine poorly. And you talked about this, and you talked about the lymphatic system being affected, and it's the largest organ in the body for elimination, cleansing, skin issues. Oh, wow. I think a lot of people are going to love to hear about this. Toxicity, human smells. Why sometimes we smell. Yep. Could you please expound on that issue?
Yes, that's the one that deals directly with this fermentation and putrefaction that I spoke to you about. Starch requires amylase, which is an alkaline kind of base solution to break it down efficiently. Protein requires an acid-based solution. And when you mix the two, that's when you actually is diluting the digestive juices to break down either efficiently. And so you're overburdening your body and your lymphatic system, which is what is trying to move all these poisons out. So, if you do this once or twice, Cynthia, you do it 1 or 2 days out of the year, not a problem. If you do it 1 or 2 days out of the week, but think of doing this day in and day out. Like me, since I was a baby. By the time I was in my 20s, I was a basket case of all of this, sludge in my. Now, good thing I was an athlete in college. That helped me a little bit in terms of, the exercise and moving that. But, a lot of people goes over their head that I really started having my health issues after college. It was after that when I was more sedentary and I was in my in the business world and at these staff meetings and eating all this stuff and then coffee so all of that poison was just loaded up in my lymphatic system, which got overwhelmed, and that's where all the tumors come and as we talked about the fermentation and I had migraine headaches. And that was probably from too much alcohol. Because now when you understand that, what happens when you have too much alcohol? What do you have the next day? You have a headache. So you can get a headache from being a very good Christian, eating your starches wrong. And guess when most good Christians have their biggest headaches and problems? Right after the potluck.
Oh, wow. You just hit the bullseye there. And I hope you can give some advice about the potluck. I mean, I love potlucks, but it is true. We have so much food at some of the potlucks until it's just it's just not the best thing, I know. But maybe you can give some advice. Maybe we should just do just a whole lot of the same dish, several dishes at one potluck, maybe that's best advice.
You really don't have to. Let me tell you the blessing and the curse. The blessing is you got all these saints doing these well-designed, well-thought-out meals. And some of these meals, the single meal is a complete, has like 3, 4, 5 different things in it by itself. So the saints are doing a good job. So you don't want to discourage the saints. But what you want to do is encourage the folks to use a little bit of intelligence. One of the laws of health is moderation, right? So moderation says you avoid the things that are harmful and you do the good things in moderation. So it was funny, people watch me when I'm at the potluck and everybody and their brother wanted me to taste their food to say, how about this one, Dr. Sharps? And me, if anybody knows me, I'm not going to insult anybody under any circumstances. So I'll say, Sister Luella, this is outstanding. And it's good. I'm not going to say, you know what, but don't combine it with Sister Mary's blueberry pie or whatever. I basically try to say, you know what, figure out, the thing about food combining is you have to honor your individual requirements and capacities. If, all those saints that raise their hand for prayer, they can't take the liberties as those that have our hands down that's not praying for prayer. So they need to exercise a little bit more moderation in terms of not necessarily the amount. And incidentally, what I talk about in these potlucks, I said most people have what is called big hand syndrome. What I mean by that is the size of the stomach is 2 hands. And so you'll see Sister Luella again, about 5 foot nothing, with the hands of a basketball player. She must have the hands. She must have the hands of a 7-footer. When you look at all this stuff on that plate.
Wow.
You see what I'm saying? So you don't want to have big hand syndrome. So be intelligent. Pick out 3 or 4 things and major on that. And then maybe for the later meal, take a little doggy bag or something. Don't try to get 10, 7, 8 different 9 things on your plate and then go for seconds and expect not to be, being able to make it through the rest of the Sabbath, for example, because right after that, it knocks you out. You have so much alcohol and everything, you got to fall asleep.
Wow.
To recover from a hangover.
Okay. And I think also with
now I'm exaggerating to make a point now. You know that.
No,
right?
I know what you're saying, but yeah, people generally do. They eat a lot. They do want to sleep. And of course, you mentioned about the skin, and this is why we have some of the skin issues because we're toxic. And so sometimes we would change our food combinations, then we wouldn't have some of these skin issues that we have as well.
Amen.
Okay, so rule 3, 2 or more different proteins.
Right.
Combine poorly.
Right.
And you mentioned, and please mention, I think this is where you talk about 80% of the cancers being eradicated through diet alone. And you mentioned herbs and again, you mentioned the animals. Please talk about this because this is very important. They're all very important, but this is important too.
Yeah, more than 80%. As a matter of fact, the cancer industry would go out of business overnight if not just food combining, it's all the individual medicine. So you can eat the best food in the world, but if you don't get air and oxygen, you're going to die.
Yes,
so
definitely.
It's basically all of them, but just sticking to the food and this particular principle on the 2 or more different proteins. My typical diet. Now, I was a poor man's son. I think I told you I grew up in New York City, in the streets of New York City, and so we didn't get much meat, which was a blessing. And so by the time I got out of college and got into IBM, that's when I really started getting sick because I can afford to get the best cut of the hog, my bacon and eggs and grits with butter. And then I wanted to be healthy, so I had a little bit of beans on the side and maybe some nuts and some cereal. So you can see all of these proteins. So grains have proteins, nuts and seeds have proteins, beans have proteins, meat have proteins, eggs, all these have proteins, but they're all these different kinds of proteins, which challenges, again, the digestive system. And so it causes incomplete breakdown of any one of those different proteins. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So even different types of protein, bacon and eggs and sausage and eggs and ham and eggs and then having a little bit of nuts and some cereal with it. I'm not going to mention it, but one of the ways I became, I got baptized is I did one of my first doctorates evaluating a lifestyle center. And I went there because I said, wow, these people think like me. And I went there and their principle was all of God's given foods are good for you. And they had all these different combinations. And I went at the end of the thing. Now, I wasn't even baptized at the time. As a matter of fact, that's how I became baptized. I was at this lifestyle center. And then when at the end, I said, you know, this is the best program I've ever seen. You only make 2 errors. Incidentally, one of those errors was food combining. And when the president, of course, he didn't have a chance in terms of arguing with me scientifically and logically. But then they sent me to the director, who was a medical doctor. And he didn't realize it, but he didn't have a chance either because they don't teach. He was bright. He was smarter than me in terms of chemistry and a lot of other things. Very bright person. But they don't teach nutrition in medical. So he didn't have a chance. After 2 hours, he said, well, we also go by the spirit of prophecy. Now, again, here I am, this uncircumcised heathen, Philistine. You're talking about the spirit of, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the science of digestion. So long story short, I said, and I knew who they were talking about because I was sitting in the meetings. I did my paper based on that. And so I said, what did she write? So they gave me 2 books. He gave me 2 books. Counsels on Diet and Food.
Who is she? Who is she?
Yeah, it was Ellen G. White.
She's okay.
Yeah, and they said, and so that was the person that they were talking about. And I said, and you know, I heard of Deepak Chopra, I heard about all these experts. I heard about the guy from Thailand, all these experts. I said, what does she write? I haven't heard of her. And she said, well, she was the most prolific female writer of all time. I said, what? And so the interesting thing was, I think I told you, I left Catholicism, but I didn't tell you I left for 30 years, exactly 30 years. At 18, at the age of 48, that's when I was writing my first doctorate. So 30 years later, here it is. And I'm listening to these people. I said, they make sense. And even what they were talking about, when they talked about all of her prophecies, I said, wow. I said, you know what? This is interesting. I was even thinking of looking into that. I mean, I looked into all the other religions. I was about to become a Taoist, as a matter of fact. I was just about to become, and then when he said this, the reason why I challenged this doctor is because I said, you know what? If this so-called prophet believed what this doctor was saying, this is a cult. So he gave me the Counsels on Diets and Foods. He gave me the Ministry of Healing, and I went home to read those books, to say, you know what? I can cross them on the list. Let me go do my microcosmic orbit and get into the Taoism thing and everything. I read that book, both of those books. 6 weeks later, I went back to that wellness center, went to the president, then go back to the doctor, went to the president, said, she's right, you guys are wrong. He pulled out this CD, everything I was telling him, he said, oh yeah, she did. He didn't even know what was in the books that they gave me. 6 months later, I became a 7-day Adventist. So that's how I came back to Christianity. And so I know she knows that was the first reason I knew she knew what she was talking about, just from what I knew from health. And of course you learn more and more and more. And so that was where I cut my teeth. And that was almost going on 30 years ago.
Well, there are probably many people who don't realize that of the blue zones, the few areas in the world where people live the longest, have the best health, Loma Linda, California, which is actually one of the headquarters / strongholds of 7-day Adventists, is there. And then Battle Creek, Michigan, that people used to, wealthy people from all over the world in 1800s would go there for their medical health issues. Dr. Kellogg, and then Ellen G. White, who, like as you mentioned, is a very prolific author, very knowledgeable about health. The 2 books you mentioned, Counsels on Diets and Foods and the Ministry of Healing, I believe they're in the Library of Congress. And so these are books that people, if you're looking to find out about health, you should look into them, because these are some of the originals. Foundation, and there are individuals now who are millionaires who have said, oh, I learned from these books and I did my own thing. And so this is something that you can research and you can look into as well. Okay, going to the next principle, number 4, rule number 4. And rule number 4 would be fats combine poorly with proteins. And you mentioned that a little dietary change even shows forth huge benefits. Tell us about the fats and the proteins not combining well together.
Yeah, the fats, their digestion actually begins in the small intestines, right? Because we said that the carbohydrates breakdowns begins in the mouth, protein in the stomach, but the fats, just a little bit of physiology, the bile goes down through the bile duct, and it goes into that first part of the small intestines, and that's where they will start to emulsify and break down those fats for further digestion. So when you eat fats, and so think of meat, think meat with all that fat in it, that has fat in it, or you eat even a good vegetarian meal, and you eat a lot of fats with it, butter or any high fat. When the brain sees that, the digestive system, it basically inhibits the secretion of the hydrochloric acid, which is needed for the pepsin secretion to break down the protein to the amino acids. Because protein, you can't take even meat or any kind of protein and just slap it and make hair and nails. It has to be broken down to its individual amino acids and restructured onto the human scale, right? Onto the human blueprint. So what happens is when you combine too much fats with protein, it basically inhibits the breakdown of those proteins. And then we talked about the putrefaction occurs because fats are more. Remember we said the body is always working to break down the most difficult thing first. Fats are the most difficult thing, and the most complex, the most condensed food that you can eat. And then it's protein, and then it's the starches.
Okay, rule number 5. Oh, yes, it does. This is excellent information. Rule number 5, sugar combines poorly with starch and proteins. Please discuss this rule.
Yeah, sugar is, we're talking about refined sugar, not the sugars that are in the fruits and vegetables, etc., or in the grains. They all, you have to have sugar, but refined sugar, when you take take refined sugar into the body, it retards the secretion of the enzymes in the mouth, etc., because it says, oh, this is already broken down, I don't need anything. So it's kind of paralyzes and shuts down that whole enzymatic system, because it wants to go straight down into the intestines. It doesn't need to be broken down, it's already broken down. And so again, you can see why eating cookies, cakes, pies, and candy with your meals is a problem. And you can see where the fermentation and the putrefaction take place. So what I tell people is, if you really want that dessert so bad, why wait till the end of the meals? Why don't you just eat the dessert? You're better off eating just the dessert and skip all of that other good food, which is not going to be able to be used for anything anyway, except for giving you a stomach ache or clogging up your system or causing constipation or diarrhea or something because of the fermentation, putrefaction, etc. So again, it's about intelligence. I'm not saying don't eat the apple pie. And what do we do at the potluck? Again, you eat all these good foods, and then there's 3 or 4 different types of desserts. You can use your imagination, Cynthia, and imagine. And you can see me there. Now, just picture me sitting there minding my own business, watching this. I don't say a word. You don't see me running up and jumping on the table and giving a lecture on food combining. I just kind of cringe internally and say, oh my word, I can see why such and such raise their hand saying, please pray for me. And I do pray for them. I pray that they learn a little bit of food combining, a little bit of moderation. Not the prayer they're looking for. What they want is pray a prayer that I can continue to live this compromised life and have it be overrun by the loving God out there, in spite of all of these things that I'm doing that are completely out of harmony. I want him to overrule his laws.
God is good, because to be honest, it is, of course, is a lack of knowledge. We are taught to have the meal and then if you're going to eat if dessert, you eat the dessert after the meal.
Right.
That's what we're taught. You don't eat it before the meal, because then you're not going to want, sometimes you eat sugar and you don't want to eat the meal. Is to eat the dessert after the meal. And we were taught this from the
I
time
know.
we were little.
I
And
know.
so this is an adjustment. And that's one thing I liked when I saw your video online. You don't condemn
No.
people.
No.
You realize that God meets people where they are. You realize that people were raised a certain way, and you try to work with what the way, first of all, starting with the standard that God has given in love, but then you try to work with people where they are and say, here, let's try to see what we can do with your diet and where you are and your health issues. And I appreciate that, because I'll be honest, I was raised eating the dessert. I didn't eat dessert. My mother was not into eating desserts after.
Right.
It was usually special days and events and
Right.
whatever. But I was raised that you eat it after the meal. I mean, I didn't know that the sugar, that if you're going to eat it, it's already processed and everything. And so go ahead and do it. But of course, that's not best. So
Well,
I appreciate your manner.
yeah. Well, the principle is dessert the desserts. And if you're going to eat it alone. And you know what you said that's so powerful, Cynthia? You said once in a while. It's not a problem once in a while. But day in and day out, dessert isn't one of the required nutrients. It's nice, but it's not a requirement for health and vitality. And I'm glad you mentioned that. Good health, food combining, isn't about judgmentalism. It's not about self-righteousness. It's about respecting everybody's individual dignity. And the reason why I'm like that is because God dealt with me all these years when I was messing up. So what right do I have to be judgmental and self-righteous? Just because I all of a sudden learn these things, now I'm gonna play God. There's only one God. I learned that a long time ago. And all I am is supposed to be is a faithful and obedient servant, not a replacement.
Wow. And that's why God has sent you to do this, because this view is needed. This view is appreciated, and people will be more open to what you have to say because you have this view. And so I really appreciate that. And the next one, rule 6, is that acids combine poorly with starch or protein foods. Please explain this rule.
Yes, yeah, thank you for asking that one. That's an important one. So what is an acid? So people, they make this great meal, and let's say it's properly combined and all that other stuff. And then they throw the vinegar on there. And vinegar is an acid. Now, if you're just eating one thing, maybe not a problem. And if you're eating just carbohydrates, not a problem. The problem is acids inhibit the secretion of the ptyalin and the pepsin. So if it's being inhibited, that means it's weakening it. And then that's where you get the fermentation of the starches and the putrefaction of the protein. So what I tell people, you do acquire a taste for this kind of acidy fatty kind of thing, because it's kind of like a vinaigrette or something like that. So what I tell them is have olive oil and lemon. You get the taste and feel of the acid, but guess what? You know what the single most important, the most powerful food for supporting the liver and rebuilding the liver is, guess what? Lemon. And guess where it makes all the enzymes? Lemon. So lemon and olive oil, as you start to understand nutrition, all this, you want to combine these things in a very intelligent manner to still titillate your taste buds, but also to be able to enhance your health and vitality. So there are ways of understanding these principles and doing it in a way that you don't have to become a monk sitting on top of a mountain just sipping on distilled spring water for the rest of your life. You can have a life, but you want to do it intelligently.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I like good food. Most people do.
Yeah. Oh
Okay.
yeah.
Rule number 7, milk combines poorly with most foods.
Right.
And when you say milk, are you referring to cow's milk? Are you referring to nut-based milks? What exactly are you referring to? And then you mentioned about breast milk, non-pasteurized versus pasteurized milk, eating a milk carton. And you said something about that.
Yeah. Sometimes you get
Lactose
more nutrition out of
intolerance.
it. You get more nutrition out of eating the milk carton than the milk itself.
And I
But
was shocked when you said that. You mentioned the cat hanging around a cow, milk and sugar, juvenile diabetes. Talk to us about these things.
yeah.
Babies. I'm sorry, babies getting colic and
Yeah. Yeah.
spitting up the milk. Please talk to us about all these things.
Yeah, yeah, there's a whole hour and a half presentation. I'm going to net it down to less than a minute. Milk is a complete food all by itself, right? It has fat, carbohydrate, and protein in it. And the body knows how to deal with all of those different constituents. And that's a complete food. The question that you asked is what kind of milk you're talking about? I'm talking about cow's milk.
Okay.
Think about it. Not even cows and bulls drink cow's milk. Only baby cows, only baby calves. And then after their calves, when they produce the milk, the cows look around each other and the bulls, and they say, well, what are we going to do with all this milk? He said, oh, well, we can't do anything with it. Well, we give it to those humans because they don't know any better. So it curdles. See, even when you have mother's milk, which is the best milk, it curdles in the stomach. But the body knows how to handle that. And so when you have other foods with it, that curdling wraps around the other foods. And so you can't get to the carbohydrate, fat, or protein, whatever it is. So milk, that was my biggest problem. I thought milk was a health food. And I didn't realize I was lactose intolerant. And you mentioned a brilliant thing. You mentioned pasteurization. If you notice, milk wasn't a problem before the 1900s. You never really heard any problems. It wasn't until the early 1900s after pasteurization took place. Now you can drink milk by itself. And as a matter of fact, if you read some of the old health literature, they talk about warm milk for this, that, and the other issues because it's a complete food. But when you pasteurize it, the heat is so high. Remember we talked about the enzymes in the fruit and vegetables that help you to break it down? There are enzymes in mother's milk, obviously, but even in cow's milk that help you to break it down. But when you pasteurize it, you destroy those enzymes. So you turn a food that can be broken down to, as I said, the carton that the milk is made in is, you might as well eat the carton because that's what it is. It's like eating just plain plastic or eating the bag. Does that make sense?
That you should say eat the carton versus the milk. And this is another thing that blew me away. I mean, I had heard this years ago about baby cows drink baby cow's milk. Adult cows do not. So why are we drinking something that baby cows are supposed to drink, and even the adult cows don't? And you mentioned that even was it a cat? You don't see a cat.
Well, the cat study
waiting to drink milk.
Yeah, what I talk about is the cat study, and this is a study that basically took cats, and this goes to the pasteurization issue. And remember, I said if it's not pasteurized, at least you can handle it by itself. But when they break up the cats into two different groups, the ones that are on the unpasteurized milk, they continue. They do this for like 3 or more generations. They can never continue the studies past the 3rd generation for the pasteurized group because they become extinct. They no longer can produce. That's how bad it is. See, cats have a shorter lifespan, so you can study multiple generations. And so that cat study, it basically makes that point that I'm making on the pasteurization point. That what happens is on the pasteurized foods, their bones start getting weak and their teeth, etc. All those things that so-called milk build strong teeth and bones. It's just the opposite. They're falling apart. Because it can't be assimilated. Remember we said it's not what you eat, what you assimilate. So I'm kind of netting out. As I said, this is an hour and a half, 2-hour presentation by itself. But that point of pasteurization is important. But you know how difficult it is, Cynthia, to get unpasteurized milk. Most states, it's illegal.
Mhm.
You have to bootleg it like it was a like it was a drug, an illegal drug or something like that. You're not allowed to sell it. So on these farms, however, where they have it straight from the cow without the pasteurization, they don't have the problems. But it's very difficult to get. And there's reasons why they have pasteurization, right? Because of the germs, this, that, and the other thing. But the fact of the matter is that pasteurization process has rendered the milk indigestible for most human beings. And that was as I said, that was one of my major issues. As soon as I stopped drinking cow's milk, my face cleared up almost overnight.
Wow.